For more on the story, we can bring in Alexander Stubb, the former Finnish Prime Minister. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Now, over the weekend, we saw the EU ramp up its sanctions against Russia quite significantly. We had Russian banks kicked out of the SWIFT banking system, EU airspace was closed to Russian airlines and the private jets of oligarchs. Is all of this enough, in your opinion?
Well, it's a good start. And I always said from the beginning that the sanctions are going to happen in waves. I think there are two elements here. The first one is Ukrainian resistance. I think that's key at the moment. And that's why any sort of exporting or donation of arms and armaments is very welcome for Ukraine to be able to defend itself. And the other one is sanctions. And I think on the sanctions, we should be realistic. The short-term effect is very small. But the idea is that it will hit long-term. I think personally that Russia will be completely isolated politically and economically, and this will hit hard in the long term.
Let's talk about the short term, because clearly the idea is to impact Vladimir Putin's oligarch friends hard enough so they will have some sort of sway on his decision-making process. In your opinion, what do you think is the Russian president's endgame?
It's very difficult to say what his endgame is. I mean, in international relations, we of course have different theories. The madman theory is one whereby you play irrational, but you're actually a very rational player. I think the end game or the vision that Putin had when all this started and escalation started was of historic Russia, basically returning to the borders of the 1800s with one language, one religion, and one leader. And that, of course, brought with it then, the annexation, if you will, of Belarus and then of Ukraine. We simply don't know how far he's going to push this and what kind of instruments he's using. But I think paradoxically, the effect of what he's done is completely the opposite of what he thought it would be. We're seeing a Europeanization of Ukraine. We're seeing a rejuvenation of NATO. We are seeing a united West and a united European Union. We are seeing populations around the world rushing to the support of Ukraine. So basically, I think this could potentially spell the beginning of the end to Putin. And to add insult to injury, opinion polls in Finland and Sweden are moving towards NATO membership.
I want to ask you about that in a second, but I want to touch on a point which you just mentioned about how this whole conflict in Ukraine has actually resulted in the European Union becoming more than just an economic powerhouse. And as Emmanuel Macron cited in December, the bloc seems to be becoming a master of its own destiny.
Yeah, in many ways. And I've always said that the European Union advances through crisis. It did that after the Cold War by enlarging in 1995 and 2004. And of course, after the financial crisis, we took tremendous steps in economic and financial integration of the Eurozone. During the migration crisis, I think the steps were modest. During COVID, once again, we've gone beyond the remit of, I think, what the European Union usually does. And now we're seeing exactly the same thing in the security field. As I've always said, and this is especially to Ursula von der Leyen, who I think is doing an excellent job, it's not the president that makes the agenda, it's the agenda that makes the president. And I think the European Union, all of its institutions and all of its leaders have now stepped up to the plate. So that's at least the silver lining in this horrible crisis.
You mentioned this point that this crisis will only push Finland and Sweden closer towards NATO, potentially even to join the military alliance one day. But Moscow has warned of consequences, serious consequences, should that happen. Do you believe that this is a serious threat or just bluster from Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think you're probably making reference to the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Zakharova, who a couple of days said that there would be ramifications of Finnish and Swedish NATO membership. For us, this is nothing new. We've heard it from Foreign Minister Lavrov, and we've heard it from Putin as well. I think the assessment that both Sweden and Finland will have to make is to answer the question, has the security situation in Europe, and especially in northeastern Europe, radically changed? If the answer is yes, then they have to take a decision on, okay, what happens next? What we're seeing now is a movement of opinion polls. We saw one over the weekend in Sweden, first time in its history, where 41% of the population is in favor, 35 against and 25 undecided. And I expect to see some kind of an opinion poll here in Finland this week. And I think there will be, if not an overwhelming, at least a majority for NATO membership. But I do think that our political leaders, both in Sweden and Finland, have to keep a cool head in this situation. I think preparation and timing is key.
You know, Moscow is becoming increasingly isolated on the world stage. No Russian planes can land in Europe today. Russia cannot participate in Eurovision. We're not going to have the Russian flag seen at football matches. This is all going to ramp up in the days to come. Do you think this influences Vladimir Putin's decision-making process in any way, the fact that his country is isolated on the world stage, and in a few hours' time, the UN General Assembly will be talking about the crisis in Ukraine?
Yes, it will certainly influence. The problem we have in the West and elsewhere in the world that we don't know in which direction. You know, he has been now totally cornered. We are seeing a Russia which will be totally isolated from the rest of the world. Yes, there will be probably leaning then eastbound of the Russian Federation, but this is all the doing of Vladimir Putin. And, you know, when it starts to hit sports, when it starts to hit energy, when it starts to hit trade, I think what we have to start seeing also is things bubbling inside Russia, because we have to understand that regime change will not come through external pressure. It will have to come through Russia. And one of the avenues that I see coming is this military conflict and the casualties that take place with young Russian soldiers. Remember, these are kids which were born, late 1990s, early 2000, and they have parents, they have mothers. And if they feel that this is an unnecessary war, which it is, no matter how much propaganda you push into the Russian system at the moment, I think it will have consequences. That's why I keep on saying this could potentially be the end or the beginning of the end of Vladimir Putin, but we just don't know how long the path towards the end might be and what will happen in the interim. And that is what I am rather worried about.
And to be fair, we did have thousands of people taking to the streets across cities in Russia in the aftermath of this invasion in Ukraine. But of course, they were put in jail pretty quickly after. Mr. Stubb, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.